If you're visiting Winter Wonderfest at Nationals Park this month, make Walters Sports Bar your spot for dinner before or after. Walters is located across the street from Nationals Park and opens at 11 a.m.
Marriott Bonvoy is the official hotel partner of US Soccer. Join Marriott Bonvoy today to get closer to the game with exclusive perks, unforgettable experiences, and benefits that go beyond the pitch. Spring Hill Suites, part of Marriott Bonvoy, offers complimentary hot breakfast and spacious all-suite accommodations, perfect for the whole team, with room for up to 6 guests. Make your next getaway a win. Learn more at springhillsuites.marriott.com.
At number 2, the team with the second overall pick in the upcoming MLB draft, the Tampa Bay Rays, which means the number 1 pick in the upcoming MLB draft goes to the Chicago White Sox. The White Sox will land the top pick.
And welcome to Nats Chat, along with MASNsports.com Nationals insider Mark Zuckerman. I'm Al Galdi, host of the Al Galdi podcast. We say happy holidays. We say welcome to a post-winter meetings installment of this podcast. We just had MLB's 2025 winter meetings, which took place in Orlando, Florida this past Sunday through Wednesday. A whole lot of talk about the Nats potentially trading starting pitcher MacKenzie Gore and/or shortstop CJ Abrams. No trade or trades with those guys, not yet anyway. Although we this past Saturday evening had a significant trade by the Nats. We'll get to that shortly. We're doing episodes of this podcast this Nats offseason as news warrants. It is great to have you with us. Nats President of Baseball Operations, Paul Toboni, he spoke to reporters at the winter meetings. Nats manager Blake Butera, he spoke to reporters at the winter meetings. Mark was there. Lots to get into off what Toboni and Butera had to say. But the craziest Nats item from the winter meetings, at least to me, I'm guessing to many of you, was what happened with the MLB draft lottery. We on Tuesday evening at the winter meetings had the draft lottery for the 2026 MLB draft. The Nats, who were ineligible for one of the top picks in the draft, but still had ping pong balls in the lottery, don't ask, got the number 11 overall pick. But the Nats' combination of ping pong balls was drawn shortly after the Chicago White Sox's combination was drawn for the number 1 overall pick. So the Nats would have gotten the number 2 overall pick, and there's more. According to J.J. Cooper of Baseball America, he was the pool reporter who watched the actual lottery. The Nats' combination of balls actually came up in 4 of the first 9 draws. Each time the Nats were ruled ineligible and another draw was conducted. And this was off what happened 2 years ago. The Nats at the 2023 winter meetings as an ineligible team for one of the top picks in the 2024 MLB draft actually won the lottery, but the win did not count. So if you're just going by the drawings of Nats ping pong balls in MLB draft lotteries over the last 4 years, the Nats would have held the second, first, and second overall picks in MLB drafts over a 4-year stretch. Mark, I know that a lot has not gone well for the Nats in recent years, but man, they have been incredible at the MLB draft lottery. At least we can say that.
You know, and this applies to the old front office and the new front office. So whoever is magically creating those ping pong balls in the right order, somebody's doing it the right way. And unfortunately, they can't take full advantage of it. You want to get into the weeds on this one? Do you want to go through all the details of how this actually works?
We can. I mean, I think most people by now know there are anti-tanking rules in place to prevent teams from getting, super high picks, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in a row. I actually don't think those rules are bad. But the Nats basically are saying the heck with the rules. We're showing what can be done with draft lottery luck. I say this as a lifelong Washington Bullets, Washington Wizards fan. If only that team had the lottery luck that the Nats enjoy, because the Nats right now, they are elite at MLB draft lottery luck.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. When it happened 2 years ago, you're like, wow, that's kind of ridiculous. And then this year going into it, you kind of thought in the back of your mind, well, that won't happen again. And then you find out after the fact, no, it actually did happen again. And just to be clear on the rules of the anti-tanking rules, and you're right, I do think it is an important feature in it. Now, maybe the execution of it could be a little bit better. What it essentially says is this: no team may appear in the lottery 3 straight years. And that happened in this case to the Rockies. That's why they were not eligible to be in it this year, even though they had the worst record in baseball. But then the second component, and this is what has hurt the Nationals, is you're not allowed to be in the draft lottery in consecutive years, back-to-back years, if you are considered by Major League Baseball to be a revenue-sharing payer instead of receiver. And that's a convoluted way of essentially saying you're considered big market and you contribute to revenue sharing, which goes to small market teams. Now, there are plenty of people out there who are going to say, hang on, the Nationals are considered a big market club given their TV situation all these years and everything else that goes on. Yeah, I don't know the formula for how that works. I'm not going to sit here and try to say whether they should be considered that or not, but that's the reason for it, that if you take that out, at least they would be allowed to be in the lottery back-to-back years. But because of that, they can only be in it every other year, at least until, by the way, maybe they start winning again and don't have to worry about being in the lottery at all because they're actually a successful franchise again.
Well, what's funny, too, is that the MLB draft is the least predictable, I think, of the big four drafts when you're talking MLB, NFL, NHL, NBA. And so, honestly, like whether you have the number 2 overall pick or number 11 overall pick, I don't know that there is that much of a difference. So like the idea of, hey, if we get a bunch of top 2 or top 3 picks, we'll get good again quickly. Like that's not really how the MLB draft works. But yeah, the Nats right now, a lot of good fortune when it comes to the MLB draft lottery. Okay, so it's tricky right now because on the one hand, it's like, do we need to be bracing ourselves for a seismic trade or seismic trades that are coming here for the Nats? MacKenzie Gore, CJ Abrams, a ton of talk during the winter meetings of Gore and Abrams being available. We heard about the New York Yankees being in connection with the Nats about a potential trade for Gore. We heard about the Baltimore Orioles as a potential destination for MacKenzie Gore, but so far, no trade. And of course, a trade could come tomorrow. A trade could come in January. A trade could come in the regular season. A trade could not come at all. Like, we don't know. I know that Paul Toboni and Blake Butera aren't going to tell us what the team is thinking, but in your time in Orlando, were you able to gather anything in terms of what you think the Nats may be thinking internally about potentially trading MacKenzie Gore and or CJ Abrams?
The term that Toboni kept using, and he even apologized on the last day because he understood that he keeps using the exact same term, is open-minded. And they are completely open-minded to whatever offers they might get. They're not going to just from the start say, nope, we're not doing that. We would not trade this guy or that guy. In the situation they're in, they feel like they have to be willing to at least consider everything. And I think that applies to, and we're going to get to the Jose Ferrer trade, but I think it applies to that. They didn't necessarily go into all this saying, hey, we're going to trade our young closer who has 4 years of club control left. But when the possibility came up and they were able to get somebody they feel like can make a big difference for them in the long run, they said, yeah, that's a move we need to make. So I think that's how they're viewing Gore and Abrams. I don't necessarily think it's a case of them actively shopping them. I don't think they're going around calling every team in the league saying, hey, you want MacKenzie Gore? Do you want CJ Abrams? Like, what would you give up for him? I think other teams recognize the position the Nats are in and are contacting Paul Toboni and saying, hey, we're interested in Gore. And his response is not going to be, no, hang up the phone. I'm not doing that. It's, okay, let's hear what you're willing to pay for him. And I think, especially in Gore's case, he's got 2 years of club control left. I know he hasn't necessarily been consistent, but we've seen the last 2 years how great he was in the first half, and he was an all-star this year. And given how important pitching is to teams, and affordable pitching because he doesn't cost that much because he's still in arbitration, I feel like there is a real market for him. And somebody's going to offer Paul Toboni something that he deems worthwhile. And I think there's a pretty good chance of Gore being traded sometime this winter. Now, you could maybe say you want to roll the dice and say, I might get more for him if I wait till July. If he has another great first half and teams start getting desperate and going into a pennant race, yeah, you can do that. But the danger of that is, what if he gets hurt? What if he doesn't pitch well? I think his value is probably high enough right now for them to find something. I think in CJ Abrams' case, there's more of an argument for waiting because he did have a bad second half. There is this question. I think people around baseball kind of understand that CJ Abrams is tremendously talented. He's inconsistent, and They know what happened 2 years ago at the end of the season with him being sent down, quote unquote, but basically sent home for the final week of the season. And this question of, is his head on straight? And is that a red flag or something like that? And so I think in his case, his value may be down a little bit from where it could be. He also has 3 years of club control, so maybe less motivation on the Nats' part to move him right now. But again, if they got the right offer, I think they would do it.
The other thing with Abrams is the defense. He is not a good defensive shortstop, and so are you going to be willing to give up a lot for a guy who you're not going to be having play a premium defensive position, which is what shortstop is? His struggles at shortstop might actually be more significant than the offensive inconsistency when it comes to his trade value. It is so, I think, interesting what the Nats should do with these guys, because there's an argument for, hey, in an offseason, you, in theory, have more suitors for people because in a season, you're dealing with more just trading to contenders, whereas in an offseason, it's like everyone should be open to making moves. So there's that. There's also this idea of Paul Toboni is implementing a brand new process in this organization. More clear, that could not be, right? Analytics, sports science, data, etc. And so if you're Toboni, might it make sense to keep these guys for at least the beginning of next season, implement your process, maximize these guys, and then trade them, rehab their values a bit. Like you said, with each guy, neither guy is at what you would call peak value right now. So I think there's an argument to be made there. We talked late this past Nats season of, if you're Toboni, is it at all possible that you look at this situation and say to yourself, it's not as bad as people think. If we implement our process, if we make some shrewd acquisitions, we can supercharge the rebuild to where the team is in wildcard contention in 2026. It's been interesting to try to read and listen through the lines on what Toboni and also Blake Butera are saying. And I know you've written about this for massinsports.com. It feels like the team right now is taking more of a longer-term approach to things as opposed to, hey, we can supercharge this thing to where the team is good in 2026.
Agreed. They're being very careful not to say anything specifics. And you can understand why that is. They don't want to write off the 2026 season because that's probably not a great look anyways, and it may defeat their, strategy of what they're trying to do in terms of other teams, what they might be interested in or what they think the position that the Nats are in. But it wasn't real hard to pick up on a couple of phrases that each used. Paul Toboni even used some of this in the letter that he wrote to fans that was emailed out and published on team website and social media. It read to me like, we had that question right at the start of him being hired. Okay, is he going to be trying to complete the rebuild that Mike Rizzo started in 2021, 2022? Or is he going to be starting over and doing his own rebuild? And my interpretation of it was, and sorry to say this, but my interpretation was he's starting over. Now, that doesn't mean it has to take 3, 4, 5 years. There may be enough already in place and they may have an approach in which they can make significant improvements just by who they are and what they're going to do. That doesn't have to take that long. But the openness to trading guys, the fact they did trade Jose Ferrer already, somebody you would not normally think of trading if you're trying to win in the next couple of years, the lack of any real connection between them and any free agents of any consequence so far this winter, doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but there have been no signs, and that's not just coming from the Nats, but like you're not hearing national reporters out there or agents even floating their name as a possibility for some of these guys. It just reads to me like Paul Toboni saw what's here and said, yeah, there are some really good, promising young pieces, but there's not enough. And I want to do this my way. And so I don't know details of his contract, but I think he has some security and believing it doesn't matter what the past guys did. It's not my problem. I was brought here to build this team into a winner, and I'm going to do it the long and slow way and believe that will pay off in the long run.
And I do think that that's the correct approach to take, even though, like you said, it's not what people want to hear. And if you're hearing this and you're super discouraged, I get that. I totally do. But, Paul Toboni was hired to fix a mess, and he did not create the mess, but he's here to fix it, and he should go about fixing it the way that he sees fit. And, you just think about this logically. he wouldn't be here if things were in especially good shape. Like, the reason that he is here is that things are not in good shape. That was an interesting message that the Nats this past Monday morning put out from Paul Toboni. And among the key portions of the message, and by the way, the message was long, so you might want to set aside a good 10, 15 minutes to read over that thing. But among the key portions of the message, quote, "Somewhere out there, the players who will comprise the next great Washington Nationals teams are taking shape, and they will largely be developed inside our walls," end quote. And that pretty clearly was an acknowledgement of the Nats needing to get better at drafting and player development. And I did think that it was good that Paul Toboni recognized that. It was good to read that. But when you put something like that out there, there's sort of a sub-communication of, this may take a while, that this isn't going to be something that is achieved tomorrow.
Correct. And there was that. There were some other hints. Blake Butera even talked a little bit in terms of thinking more long-term than short-term. And I think there's a lot of frustrating parts of it, certainly. But I do think there is this alternate universe out there, and we've talked about this, where you can look at what they have and say, they may not be that far away. And if you spend a little more and make some wise decisions and add this piece here and that piece there, and if you truly believe that a new coaching staff and a new front office that prioritizes some different things can elevate the players they already have to another level that everybody thinks they can get to, that it's not that far-fetched to think you could turn this team into a borderline contender in the next year or two. We know it doesn't take that much. I think 83, 84 wins got into the playoffs this year as a wild card. So there is a world out there that you could see that and make sense of doing that. That does not appear to be the way they're doing it. And again, that's not wrong. And I think if you are Paul Toboni and you've got your first chance to run an entire organization and you're overhauling the front office and a completely new manager and coaching staff, and by the way, all these coaches are so young and inexperienced themselves, it's not exactly the kind of staff you put together if you think you're trying to win immediately. I think in his mind, his task is not to finish what somebody else started, but his task is to do this his way and build his own, as he calls it, the envy of all sports. Well, you don't do that overnight. That's a long-term project, and he seems to believe that's the best way to go. And that could be very frustrating for fans, for everybody who follows the team and cares about them and has been frustrated by what's happened the last 5 to 6 years. But the blame for that doesn't necessarily go to the guys in charge now. The blame goes to the people who were running the organization the last 5 years and let it get to this point.
Hey Nats fans, after the exciting Nats game, have a listen to some relaxing solo piano music to unwind and help you go to sleep. I'm Tim Newmark, the composer of the Nats Chat theme song, and you can find my latest music on Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, and anywhere you stream music. The song you're hearing now is called Improv in A-flat major, The End of the Road.
Marriott Bonvoy is the official hotel partner of US Soccer. Join Marriott Bonvoy today to get closer to the game with exclusive perks, unforgettable experiences, and benefits that go beyond the pitch. Spring Hill Suites, part of Marriott Bonvoy, offers complimentary hot breakfast and spacious all-suite accommodations, perfect for the whole team, with room for up to 6 guests. Make your next getaway a win. Learn more at springhillsuites.marriott.com.
This is Michael Rosenbaum. Hey, folks, let me tell you that drinking and driving is a decision that will change your whole world. Things will never be the same once you get a DUI, because legal fees and time in court are just the beginning. Getting into a crash is another way your world could be irreversibly changed after drinking and driving. Your vehicle may not be the only thing that gets damaged in that crash. You could face a life-altering injury or even death. But you're not the only one who could face those consequences. Your decision to drink and drive could permanently change someone else's world, whether you injure them or leave their loved ones grieving. The next time you're out drinking, call a rideshare, a taxi, a sober friend, or a designated sober driver. Always plan for a safe ride home. The only decision that will change your world for the better is the decision to call for a sober ride. It's never worth it to drive drunk. Don't risk it. Drive sober or get pulled over. Paid for by NHTSA.
He was part of the 2021 draft. When I was with the Red Sox, we were picking fourth. It was the year we took Marcelo, and I think part of this was like Harry was part of our mix. So we spent a lot of time really getting to know Harry as a person and understanding the makeup there. Felt great about it.
So regarding the trade that the Nats made over the weekend, the Nats on Saturday evening announcing having traded lefty reliever Jose A. Ferrer to the Seattle Mariners for two prospects, catcher Harry Ford and right-handed pitcher Isaac Lyon. And the principal prospect here is Harry Ford, who would appear now to be the Nats' number one catcher. Harry Ford is going into his age 23 season. He is the number 42 overall prospect in baseball per MLB Pipeline, is the number 74 overall prospect in baseball per Baseball America. So the Nats traded Jose A. Ferrer for a top 100 prospect, one of the top catching prospects in the sport. Ford was taken by the Mariners with the number 12 overall pick in the 2021 MLB draft out of a high school in Georgia. This guy, Isaac Lyon, is going into his age 22 season, was taken by Seattle in the 10th round of the 2025 MLB draft out of Grand Canyon University in Arizona. There's a lot to think about with this trade, but I think you start with this. Is it, in fact, appropriate and accurate to read this as Keibert Ruiz is done as the Nats' number one catcher and that Harry Ford now is the number one catcher in the organization?
I'm not quite going that far yet, at least based on what Blake Butera and Paul Toboni said, is that they're trying to frame this as an open competition and that they will come to spring training, and they include Riley Adams in that category. I think we know Riley Adams is not likely to beat out these guys for the number one job if everybody's healthy. But they want them to come to spring training, show them what they've got. They insist that, by all the reports, that Keibert Ruiz is healthy, that he has been working out, that there are no lingering concussion issues. I don't know how you can know that for certain until he's actually in something that resembles a game-like situation where there's a fear of being hit in the head again. But, they're saying that he's good to go. And so you come to spring training and you find out what you have and then base your decisions on that. Clearly, Harry Ford, you don't go and make that kind of move unless you believe that this is the long-term answer, if not the short-term answer. Now, he only has a few games of big league experience, so you could make the argument that he's not quite ready yet. He's still pretty young. That said, his ceiling is higher, no doubt about it. He has some skills that Keibert Ruiz does not, including speed, very good speed for a catcher. His defensive game is still kind of work in progress. They acknowledge that. He feels like he's getting better at it. A pretty good offensive catcher, still young, very athletic, and a guy who is touted in a way that Keibert Ruiz never really was. So we understand the situation with Ruiz's contract. You can't just get rid of him. And if he's healthy, he's got to be somewhere and part of the equation. So I would imagine they're saying, we're going to spring training, we're going to see what we have, and maybe it's a timeshare, and the two of them start out the year alternating days, essentially. And at some point, it becomes clear one's better than the other, and then that guy takes over as the number one. I don't see a path for Riley Adams to be a part of the mix unless somebody is hurt. You also have the DH you can maybe use in some ways to help get them both in the lineup. But I think deep down, they made this trade because they believe Harry Ford is going to be their long-term answer at catcher, whether that happens on opening day or at some point down the road.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about it logically, you don't trade for a Harry Ford if you're still planning on Keibert Ruiz being your number one catcher. I mean, a few things stood out to me with the way that Blake Butera talked about this. So every manager / head coach should frame things as competition, right? You shouldn't just hand Harry Ford the number one catcher job. That said, internally, there are honest discussions between a Butera and a Toboni about what they're thinking, what they're planning, their visions for things moving forward. And so you frame it as competition because you never know. Maybe Harry Ford struggles, maybe Keibert Ruiz catches fire, but otherwise you say, all right, we made this trade, let's see how they do. But the idea is that Ford is the guy. But the other thing is this, and we've talked about this. The way that almost every team now does catcher is it isn't just one guy and that's it. It is a timeshare because it is a grueling position and the injury rate at catcher is so high. And the way that these catchers age is just so rough. I mean, catchers do not age well. They fall off and they fall off quickly. And so Especially with a guy like Harry Ford, who is an offensive catcher. If you really value his offensive skill set, you don't want him catching 130 games a season. Like, you want to minimize that wear and tear as best you can. So maybe you do have him DH a good bit. Maybe at some point he plays some first base for you. Who knows? So you do need a very legitimate number 2 catcher. And that's where I think this thing becomes interesting. Can Keibert Ruiz at least be a decent number 2 catcher? Maybe less of Ruiz is more from Ruiz because he has caught so much. I've never understood that, but they've done that. They've had him out there a ton. I think it's been to his detriment. And I wonder if maybe that ends up giving us a better version of Keibert Ruiz. Because even if you love Harry Ford, it can't just be Harry Ford and it doesn't matter who else a catcher. Like, the Nats need a secondary catcher. And I think what becomes really interesting here is, well, could that guy in fact be Keibert Ruiz?
Yeah, I think it's a good way to look at it. Look, if they had the ability to do whatever they wanted, they may not, say, oh yeah, give me Keibert Ruiz at $35 million for the next 5 years or whatever it is that his contract is still remaining. But the reality of it is they inherited, this is the only contract they inherited from the old regime, and they have to deal with that. And I don't think at this point you just give up on that and eat it. You try to figure out what can we get from him since we're paying him anyways. And you're right, there may be a scenario in which you actually get more value out of him by playing him less, and that maybe helps protect Ford in the long run as well. I do want to point out, because we did ask about this kind of stuff, right now they consider both these guys strictly as catchers, not really viewing them as potential first basemen. I know that's the one spot on the field right now where they don't really have anybody at first base, and I think that's where they're likely to look outside in free agency or maybe a trade. It didn't sound like, aside from maybe Luis Garcia getting some reps there, it didn't sound like they view any of the catchers getting any kind of time at first base. That's not part of the plan. But to get back to Ford, I mean, there's a lot of intrigue with this guy. Was a top prospect just a few years ago. Maybe he's slipped a little bit, but I think most people around the game know that name. And when they saw that trade go down, while there was initial surprise at trading Ferrer, who none of us really thought was going to happen, we never had reason to think that was going to happen. When you saw what they were getting in Ford, you say, okay, 4 years of a really promising late inning lefty versus 6 years of a potential franchise catcher, you make that trade. That you have to do that. Not that it's easy to replace a Ferrer, because it won't be, but to me, it's a lot harder to find a potential franchise catcher. And we know that this team, whatever Ruiz's contract situation was, we know how big of a problem that position is. They needed to do something to try to shore that up, and they went pretty bold in doing something that could help them in the long run.
For sure. I mean, relievers are fickle, are unpredictable, are year to year. If you can turn one of them into a franchise catcher, you do that, and you don't think twice about it. I mean, I think you could make the case that catcher is the hardest position in sports to solve because there are so few truly great catchers anymore. Like, the way it is now, if you're a great catcher, quote unquote, you stop being a catcher. They move you away from being a catcher, a la the Nats with Bryce Harper years ago. So if you can get one of the few catchers who are true franchise players, and, we're certainly talking up Harry Ford here. We'll see what he is. But if you can get that, that is so valuable, so much more valuable than basically any kind of reliever who you can have. It's so interesting, right? Seattle has one of the rare franchise catchers in Cal Raleigh, who has put up unbelievable offensive numbers in recent seasons. So Seattle could afford to trade away Harry Ford. So, Jose E. Ferrer, you look at him and say, okay, like you said, I mean, age 26 season, flamethrower, under team control through the 2029 season. But the way to do this is you trade guys at peak value and, you follow the actions, not the words. And you wonder if Paul Toboni looked at Ferrer and said, okay, there's a lot to like here, but he also has been up and down. When you look at his success as the Nats closer / ace reliever last season, it came in a very finite period of time. So there still are a lot of questions about Ferrer. Perhaps with Toboni, there was a thinking of, let's flip this guy now at peak value or close to peak value if we can turn him into someone like a Harry Ford. So, putting aside how this plays out from a process standpoint, I think this trade makes a lot of sense. I don't know how you can not like this, what Toboni did here, what his thinking probably was here, and what the Nats could have here in Harry Ford.
Yeah, I think they did like Ferrer, and it's not that easy to get a young, promising flamethrower lefty in particular who has at least a little bit of track record, not a lot, but a little bit of track record to suggest that he can be really successful pitching late in games, whether that's as a closer or a setup man or matchup guy late in games. And if you have somebody like that and you could have him for the next 4 years, that's not somebody you're looking to trade. But I think this is another piece of evidence about what they're thinking in terms of the long term here. If you're a team that is trying to contend in the next year or two, I don't think you trade a Jose Ferrer. But if you know it's going to be longer than that and you're kind of starting over again, late inning relievers are the easiest thing to move because they are so valuable to teams that are trying to win. And you could say, hey, what do you need a closer for if you're a 95 loss team? That's hard to accept sometimes, but it is the reality. You go get the closer when you've got everything else in place and you need that final piece that gets you over the hump. So I think that's part of the thinking there. I think they liked him. I think they believe he can be good for a long time. But where they are right now as an organization doesn't really make sense to hang on to that at the expense of something else. Now, their bullpen, which is already very short on experience and even just arms of any type, is incredibly low on that right now. I mean, I'm looking at Cole Henry and Clayton Beeter. If you had to start a season today, are your top guys. They need more than that. They're going to, I think, go out and get some guys with at least some experience. I'll be interested to see what their approach is to that, if they go the Mike Rizzo approach or if they are a little more calculated in how they do it. But they do need some relievers and some guys who have actually been there and done it before, because they just don't have that with the group that's currently in place.
They don't, but this, I think, is a great test of the new process, the Paul Toboni process. Good teams, smart teams can figure out bullpens. Mike Rizzo never could figure out the bullpen. Let's see what Toboni can do here. Maybe that's part of trading away Jose A. Ferrer, too. It's Toboni saying, I believe in our process. We'll find another Jose A. Ferrer. We will put together competent bullpens year in, year out. I think that's going to be a really good test for the Nats process and whether, in fact, it is improved. Along those lines, one of the more interesting things to me from Paul Toboni in his session with you guys had to do with the Nats and technology. And we've talked so much about, okay, when it comes to Nats ownership, the Lerner Group, it's not so much about spending on players as it is on spending on infrastructure. And the Nats have been so lacking in infrastructure for so long. And Toboni, regarding where the Nats are right now in terms of technology, said this, quote, yeah, we're in a good spot. In my opinion, this is a big part of when I took the job, like I talked about feeling supported in the role, right? This is a part of it. Like we want some of these things that we know can help players develop most, and nothing has changed. Like very much feel supported in the role, end quote. Teams are very secretive about what they have, what they don't have, what they want, what they can do without. But this would seem to suggest that Toboni, at least so far, is getting what he wants from ownership in terms of spending on technology. And I think that's very significant. Now, is this a situation of robbing Peter to pay Paul? Like, is this lessening what Toboni can spend in other areas? I think that becomes a very obvious question to ask, and we don't know the answer to that question. But I loved reading that from Paul Toboni that, hey, the spending on infrastructure apparently has gone up to Paul Toboni's liking, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think in his meetings, probably even before he took the job and certainly after he took the job, when he spoke with ownership about his vision and what he feels like this organization needed that it didn't have in the past, I think this was high on the list. And it's kind of a nebulous term to say technology, and I can't tell you what exactly this is. Some of it is equipment, some of it is staffing, some of it is like computer systems, I guess is the best way to describe it, that he felt like, and I think people around baseball kind of got the sense that the Nationals were very much lagging behind the rest of the league in this kind of stuff. And it's not necessarily cheap. Some of these things do cost a lot of money, some of the equipment in particular. And I do think he made it a priority. And I don't know if it was the Lerner saying to him, yeah, go ahead, spend whatever you need for this stuff. Or if it was them saying, well, your total baseball operations budget is this. It's up to you how you want to divvy that all up. If you want to spend 50% of that on technology, but then you got to take away from some other part of the aspect, if you want to spend 50% on technology, but then you got to take something away from one of the other parts of the operations there, then maybe that's the way they had to go about it. And I don't know if we'll get the answer to that or not, but it is clear that he viewed this as a priority, and they, as an ownership group, are giving him the freedom to spend the money that he has on that kind of thing. And we'll see. It feels like you read that quote that he's got what he thinks they need now to be up to standard around the league, and in a way that they probably were not in past years.
Well, what became emblematic of this was this trajectory thing from this past summer. The Washington Post over the summer wrote about this. The Nats using a headset and virtual reality program called Win Reality instead of having invested in a more advanced, more expensive pitching machine called Trajectory, which has become very popular in MLB. And right or wrong, that became a symbol of the Nats are doing things on the cheap. Other teams are doing things the way that those things need to be done. And so, I don't know if the Nats now have Trajectory. Again, teams don't like to talk about this stuff. So it's always difficult to get specific, concrete details. But, this kind of became, the flag that people like me were waving of, hey, this team is lagging. This team is behind other teams. This team needs to catch up. And maybe, just maybe, we're starting to see that.
And I think the question that we don't really know with that was, did Mike Rizzo want this stuff? And ownership said, no, we're not spending on that. Or was that not a priority for him? We know his approach, old school, maybe doesn't think that that's the best way to use the resources that he was given, even if that was against the current norm and standard across the rest of baseball. So I would love to know, and we don't know the answer to this. Does Paul Toboni have a larger budget than Mike Rizzo did, and that's why he's able to do these things? Or does he have the same budget that Mike Rizzo did, and he's just choosing to distribute it in different ways than Rizzo did? There's got to be at least some of that in the equation, I think, but it's possible that he's also been given more money to spend.
Absolutely. The Nats being so behind in analytics and technology, we don't know whether that is a learner thing or if that's more a Mike Rizzo thing. I think it's safe to say it's a combination of both. Okay, fine. But which item actually has been more the driving factor behind that? We don't know. I don't know that we are going to know.
Keep Walters in mind if you're looking for a place to book a private event in D.C. Visit waltersdc.com/private events for more information.
Marriott Bonvoy is the official hotel partner of US Soccer. Join Marriott Bonvoy today to get closer to the game with exclusive perks, unforgettable experiences, and benefits that go beyond the pitch. Spring Hill Suites, part of Marriott Bonvoy, offers complimentary hot breakfast and spacious all-suite accommodations, perfect for the whole team, with room for up to 6 guests. Make your next getaway a win. Learn more at springhillsuites.marriott.com.
This is Michael Rosenbaum. Hey, folks, let me tell you that drinking and driving is a decision that will change your whole world. Things will never be the same once you get a DUI, because legal fees and time in court are just the beginning. Getting into a crash is another way your world could be irreversibly changed after drinking and driving. Your vehicle may not be the only thing that gets damaged in that crash. You could face a life-altering injury or even death. But you're not the only one who could face those consequences. Your decision to drink and drive could permanently change someone else's world, whether you injure them or leave their loved ones grieving. The next time you're out drinking, call a rideshare, a taxi, a sober friend, or a designated sober driver. Always plan for a safe ride home. The only decision that will change your world for the better is the decision to call for a sober ride. It's never worth it to drive drunk. Don't risk it. Drive sober or get pulled over. Paid for by NHTSA.
Here's the set, 3-2 pitch, swung on, hit in the air to deep right center field. Marsh going back, way back to the warning track, at the wall, looking up, and it is gone. Goodbye. Bang, zoom goes Riley Adams with his 8th home run of the year. It is a first inning 3-run shot with Abrams and Bell on base to score in front of him. And the Nationals do break out on top early in the top of the first inning with a 3-run homer from Riley Adams and a cutter right over the middle of the plate. Nationals 3, the Phillies nothing.
This is the first time that we've done a show since November 21st, when we had the deadline by which MLB teams needed to tender contracts to arbitration-eligible players. The Nats ended up taking care of all of their arbitration-eligible players, announced having agreed with catcher Riley Adams on a one-year contract, avoiding arbitration, and the Nats announced having tendered contracts to all of their other arbitration-eligible players. Those players, starting pitchers MacKenzie Gore, Josiah Gray, Cade Cavalli, and Jake Irvin, shortstop CJ Abrams, and second baseman / first baseman, I guess we should say, Luis Garcia Jr. But the Nats' top two non-tender candidates were Jake Irvin and Luis Garcia, and the Nats ended up tendering Irvin and Garcia. Were you surprised by that, or did you expect that?
Not necessarily those individuals, but I am surprised that everybody got tendered. I thought somebody out of that group would be non-tendered because, again, you've got a brand new front office, and these are all players they inherited, and maybe they're saying, I don't see Luis Garcia as part of our future or worth what he's be making, or I don't see Jake Irvin as part of it. I kind of thought Riley Adams was a strong candidate, and especially now when you see how they traded for Harry Ford, where does Adams fit into this? He's out of options. I think he's probably making about $1 million. So if he doesn't make the team, you have to put him through waivers. I don't think anybody's going to claim him at that price. So maybe he ends up making a lot more money than a typical AAA player makes if that's where this goes, or they eat something. I don't know. That one I thought would happen, and I thought maybe one of the others, whether it was Garcia or Irvin, I could understand that just because they want to put their own stamp on this and they don't view these guys as that. But by the same token, you do still have to put a team out there, and it may be more expensive to find replacements for them in free agency. So in their minds, it's an affordable price and worth doing. They don't have a lot of pitching depth, and especially if they trade MacKenzie Gore, they don't have a lot. And even the promising guys they have, like Cade Cavalli, Josiah Gray coming back from injury, Brad Lord, depending on what kind of role he's in, none of them has proven that they're a 150, 170 inning a year guy. Jake Irvin has shown that he can be that. So maybe for the $3-4 million he's going to make, you say that's worth it to bring him back. And in Garcia's case, they did hint that they would look at him potentially at first base, but I did think it was interesting that both Butera and Toboni, when the CJ Abrams question came up, were pretty adamant that they view him as a shortstop. There was not really any talk of, hey, we like him, we think he'd be better, but we think at second base could really get the most out of him. That's better for him. They were really talking him up as a shortstop. And so almost by process of elimination, you kind of say, well, then they may still see Luis Garcia at second base, not necessarily at first base. I think my guess is they go outside to find a first baseman, and Garcia at least starts the year as their second baseman, or maybe you use him as part of a DH rotation.
Yeah, and if the Nats do trade MacKenzie Gore, maybe that's how they get the first baseman. Like, you think about the Orioles, okay? And I don't know the likelihood of a Nats-Orioles trade, but the O's, off signing Pete Alonso, now have an abundance of first basemen. You think about Ryan Mountcastle, you think about Kobe Mayo, so maybe, that's a trade that might make sense. You trade MacKenzie Gore to the O's, you get back some prospects / young players, and among them is a first baseman or two. Who knows? Maybe that's how the Nats end up addressing first base. If the Nats were going to move CJ Abrams to second base, obviously you want to have the conversation with him before you talk about it openly with reporters. Do you think that's a conversation that already would have been had? Is it possible that that conversation is going to be had and just has not been had yet?
It's possible. I do know that they have spoken to him. Like, it's not like Butera has not reached out to him yet. They've already started that process, and it sounds like it's been good conversations so far with him. I think it could be more of, if you do think there's a chance you're going to trade him, you don't want the world to know that you don't think of him as a shortstop. You want other teams offering up what you would want for an all-star shortstop. So that may be more of it than anything else. But I think even in some of the more private conversations I had this week, I did get the sense that they at least want to see if he can be the shortstop. I think the book they have on him is that he's supremely talented, and it's more a matter of keeping him fully engaged day in and day out, and focused on every pitch here and there. We saw, especially in the second half of the year, it felt like almost every night there was a ground ball that he was having trouble with. And it just felt like, and he wasn't the only one on the team that I would say this about, that they saw the finish line. They knew it was a lost season and they were kind of going through the motions. So I think they view it as, not necessarily a question of whether he's skilled enough to play shortstop, but whether they can keep him motivated and engaged and work with him on some fundamental things to get the most out of him.
Yeah, and that, of course, speaks to the culture, and that's a whole nother topic. We could do a whole show on that, but there's no doubt that that is an area in which the Nats need real improvement. You tell us what you think. Hit us up on X at Nats_chat. You can find us on Blue Sky at Nats Chat Podcast. You can email us, natschatpodcast@gmail.com. We have a website that you can check out too, natschatpodcast.com, at which you can purchase a Nats Chat podcast t-shirt. And as I said, we're doing shows this offseason as news warrants, and I guess we'll see when the next big Nationals news item comes. Like I said, we could have massive news in terms of MacKenzie Gore and or CJ Abrams being traded. We could have no news for a good long while here. You cover the team. You know this better than anybody. We just don't know right now.
No, we don't. And definitely something I picked up on in the last week. I had not covered a winter meetings that Mike Rizzo wasn't in charge of since 2008. So in that time, for better or worse, you kind of got a sense of how the guy operated and how they do things. And you could sometimes figure out, okay, I think this means that. And the timing, he doesn't like to do things this time of year, but he might do it this time of year. We're in a whole new world here now, and it's kind of hard to really know how they plan to do any of this. I did sense that Toboni maybe went to the winter meetings thinking he'd be a little more active than he was, and was a little surprised that not as much did happen. Maybe that's naivete of a guy in charge for the first time, not realizing that things can go a little slower, or it's not just up to you, it's up to other teams and agents and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see. There's plenty of time left. The conclusion I came away from all of it was that they really just spent the first 2 months of the offseason getting their house in order. They had a lot to do to build a front office, build a coaching staff. And I think they're only just now really getting into player evaluation and communicating among everyone. Hey, what do we think about this? What is our plan for this or that? As I wrote on massinsports.com, I think those first 2 months were about the remodeling of the house. I think these next 2 months are now about finally putting some furniture in and figuring out what's going to go where. And so I think there's going to be a lot more to be done between now and when pitchers and catchers report in 2 months.
It's awfully cold in the house with no furniture, especially this time of year. So hopefully things warm up for the Washington Nationals. All right, well, happy holidays. We appreciate you listening, and we will talk to you at some point soon. We look forward to that. For Mark Zuckerman, I'm Al Galdi, and we'll talk to you next time on the Nats Chat Podcast.
3 balls, 2 strikes. The pitch on the way. Swing and a miss. He got him on the changeup. So Ferrer wins that matchup, and he retires the side with 2 men stranded in scoring position. Nice work by Jose A. Ferrer here in the 7th inning.
Marriott Bonvoy is the official hotel partner of US Soccer. Join Marriott Bonvoy today to get closer to the game with exclusive perks, unforgettable experiences, and benefits that go beyond the pitch. Spring Hill Suites, part of Marriott Bonvoy, offers complimentary hot breakfast and spacious all-suite accommodations, perfect for the whole team, with room for up to 6 guests. Make your next getaway a win. Learn more at springhillsuites.marriott.com.